In this episode, we shift from doors and rooms to something that happens inside every system all the time: logging, which is the act of recording what happens so you can understand events later. Beginners often think logs are only for experts or only for after something bad happens, but logs are really a day-to-day safety net, like keeping receipts and security camera footage for your digital world. Centralizing logging means collecting important logs from many systems into one place where they can be protected, searched, and compared, rather than leaving them scattered across individual machines. Retaining credible forensic evidence means keeping those records in a way that makes them trustworthy, so that if you need to investigate an incident, you can rely on what the logs say and prove they were not altered. The goal is not to hoard every possible line of text, but to keep the right evidence with the right protections for long enough to answer real questions. By the end, you should be able to explain why central logging matters for payment environments, what makes evidence credible, and how organizations build logging programs that help both during calm days and during crises. Before we continue, a quick note: this audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. To understand why centralized logging matters, it helps to picture what an investigation feels like without it. Imagine a strange event occurs, like a payment system behaving oddly or an account being used at an unusual time, and you need to know what happened. If logs are scattered, you might have to sign into many different systems, each with its own format, time settings, and retention limits, and some might already have overwritten the data you need. Even worse, if an attacker gained access, they might delete or modify local logs on the same system they compromised, because it is much easier to erase evidence when the evidence lives next to the crime scene. Centralized logging changes this by making a separate, protected place where copies of important events are stored. It also makes correlation possible, meaning you can connect the dots between events on different systems, like seeing that a login to one server was followed by a configuration change on another. For beginners, central logging is like keeping copies of important messages in a secure mailbox rather than leaving all messages on scattered sticky notes around the house. A log is simply a record of an event, but not all events are equally useful, and not all logs are equally reliable. Some logs record security-relevant actions, like logins, failed login attempts, account creation, privilege changes, and access to sensitive data. Other logs record system health information, like services starting and stopping, storage running low, or applications crashing, which can still matter because attackers sometimes cause or hide behind errors. Network devices can log connections and traffic patterns, which can show suspicious movement between systems. Applications can log what users did inside the app, which can help confirm whether a sensitive action was legitimate or not. The beginner lesson is that logs are clues, and investigations are like assembling a story from many clues, not trusting a single line in isolation. Centralization makes those clues easier to gather and compare, which increases the chance you can reconstruct what happened accurately. Credible forensic evidence is about trust, which is a subtle but critical idea. If you want to use logs to investigate an incident, you need confidence that the logs reflect real events and have not been altered to mislead you. Credibility starts with completeness, meaning logs are actually being generated for the events you care about, and they are not missing big gaps during important times. It also involves integrity, meaning the logs have protections that prevent unauthorized modification. Another factor is provenance, which is a fancy way of saying you know where the log came from and can show that it was collected from a specific system in a controlled way. For beginners, think of credible evidence like a sealed package with a clear label, not a loose sheet of paper that could have been edited by anyone. In payment environments, where investigations can lead to serious decisions, credible logs are essential because they support accountability, response, and sometimes legal or compliance requirements. Centralized logging usually relies on the idea of a collector or platform that receives logs from many sources. The key is that logs should be sent off the original system as soon as reasonably possible, so that even if the original system is damaged, compromised, or wiped, the central copy remains. This often involves agents or forwarding methods that transmit logs securely. But the beginner-friendly point is simply that logs move from where they are created to a safer place for storage and analysis. The central platform should be hardened too, because it becomes a valuable target. If an attacker can control the logging platform, they can hide their tracks across the whole environment. That is why access to the logging system is often restricted, monitored, and separated from ordinary user activity. Centralization also helps standardize formats, because different systems speak different log languages, and the central system can normalize or organize them for searching. The result is that security teams can ask questions like, "Show all failed logins for this account across the last day," without manually hunting through dozens of machines. Retention is about time, and it is more complicated than simply choosing a large number of days and calling it done. Retention needs to reflect how long it might take to notice an incident and how far back you might need to look to understand its start. Some attacks are loud and immediate, but many are quiet, involving gradual discovery, credential theft, and slow movement through systems over weeks or months. If logs are only kept briefly, you might detect the end of the story but lose the beginning, which makes it harder to understand what was compromised and what needs to be fixed. Beginners should also recognize that retention is constrained by storage and cost, which is why good retention strategies focus on collecting the most valuable logs at sufficient detail rather than collecting everything at maximum detail forever. A common approach is to keep recent logs in a readily searchable form and then archive older logs in a more compact form while maintaining integrity protections. The goal is to keep evidence long enough to be useful while still being practical and reliable. Another foundation for credible evidence is time consistency, because logs are only meaningful if you can trust the timestamps. If one server thinks it is noon and another thinks it is 12:07, your event timeline becomes confusing, and an attacker can exploit that confusion by creating misalignment that makes correlation harder. Even in normal conditions, different devices may drift slightly over time, and that drift adds up. The beginner point is that computers have clocks, and those clocks need to be aligned so that your records tell a coherent story. When logs are centralized, the platform can help detect time anomalies, but it cannot fully fix bad timestamps coming from sources. Ensuring that systems keep accurate time supports the credibility of evidence, because a log line is far less useful if you cannot place it correctly in a sequence of events. In investigations, building a timeline is one of the most important tasks, and timeline accuracy depends heavily on synchronized time. Integrity protections are the difference between logs as helpful notes and logs as dependable evidence. One part of integrity is access control, meaning only authorized people can view or manage logs, and even fewer people can delete or alter them. Another part is immutability, which is the idea that once logs are stored, they should not be editable without leaving evidence of that change. Some systems use write-once approaches or cryptographic techniques like hashing to detect tampering. And while the details can be complex, the concept is simple. If someone tries to change the record, you should be able to tell. Beginners can compare this to a notebook where every page is numbered and sealed, making it obvious if a page is removed or edited. It is also important to track administrative actions on the logging platform itself, because if the logging system is the source of truth, you must be able to verify that the truth source was not quietly altered. Credible evidence is not only about collecting logs, but also about protecting the log system from becoming the next target. A frequent challenge in centralized logging is deciding what to log at the right level of detail. If you log too little, you may miss crucial context, like which user performed an action or which system initiated a connection. If you log too much, you can overwhelm storage and make real alerts harder to find, because searching becomes slow and noise becomes constant. A beginner-friendly way to think about this is that logging should capture the important who, what, when, where, and sometimes how, especially for authentication events, privilege changes, access to sensitive resources, and changes to security controls. You also want logs that explain failures and errors, because attackers often produce unusual errors while probing systems. The best logging strategy is intentional, not accidental, and it is guided by questions you expect to need answered during an incident. If you cannot answer basic questions like, which account changed this setting, or what system accessed this database, then your logs are not serving their main purpose. Centralization also supports correlation, which is the ability to compare events across sources to detect patterns. For example, a single failed login might be normal, but a burst of failed logins across many systems could indicate a brute force attempt. A login from a new location followed immediately by a password change, and a privileged action could indicate an account takeover. A new device appearing on a network followed by an unusual set of connections might indicate a rogue system. Beginners should notice that these patterns become visible only when logs are in one place, because no single system holds the full picture. Correlation can be done manually by searching, or it can be supported by analytics and alerting, but even basic correlation is valuable. When logging is centralized, you can build a coherent narrative instead of a pile of disconnected facts. That narrative is what makes evidence useful for response decisions, like isolating a system, disabling an account, or expanding an investigation. Forensic evidence also depends on handling and process, not just technology. When an incident happens, people may rush, and rushed actions can accidentally destroy evidence, such as rebooting systems, wiping temporary storage, or overwriting logs. A reliable approach includes rules about who can access systems during an investigation, what actions require approval, and how evidence is preserved. Even if you are not doing deep forensics, you still need basic evidence discipline, like ensuring logs are exported, protected, and backed up before major changes are made. Beginners should understand the idea of chain of custody, which is essentially a documented record of who handled evidence and when, to show it was not tampered with. In many environments, centralized logging helps simplify this, because the central store can serve as a controlled record that is less likely to be altered by incident responders in the heat of the moment. Credibility increases when evidence handling is predictable and documented, rather than improvised under pressure. There is also a trust but verify aspect to logging, because logs can be missing or misleading even without malicious intent. Systems can fail to forward logs due to network issues, storage can fill up, log sources can be misconfigured, and updates can change formats unexpectedly. Attackers can also try to generate noise to hide real actions, or they may attempt to disable logging entirely once they gain privileged access. Beginners should learn that logging is a control that needs monitoring itself, meaning you should watch for signs that log collection has stopped, that volumes have changed dramatically, or that a key source has gone silent. This is like noticing that your security camera is unplugged, which is not the same as seeing nothing happened. Centralized logging platforms often provide health indicators, but teams still need to pay attention and respond to failures quickly. A logging program is reliable only when it is maintained like a critical system, not treated as a one-time setup. In payment-focused environments, centralized logging supports both security operations and compliance expectations by showing that controls are active and that events can be investigated. This does not mean logging is only a box to check, because the real value is in faster detection and clearer response. When a suspicious event occurs, being able to quickly answer what happened reduces downtime and reduces the chance of making the wrong response decision. It also helps reduce the scope of incidents by identifying which systems and accounts were actually involved, rather than assuming the worst everywhere. Beginners should see that logs are not just about attackers. They are also about mistakes, misconfigurations, and failures that can cause security problems accidentally. Central logs can show repeated access failures that indicate a broken integration or configuration changes that explain a new outage. In other words, centralized logging makes the environment more understandable, and understanding is a form of security. Finally, it helps to connect centralized logging and credible evidence to everyday habits that make security stronger over time. When teams regularly review logs, test whether forwarding works, and practice finding answers to common incident questions, they become more confident and faster in real situations. When retention is planned, integrity is protected, and time is synchronized, investigations become less about guessing and more about verifying. Centralized logging also creates a common language across systems, making it easier for different teams to collaborate, because they can reference shared records rather than arguing about what each system probably did. Beginners should take away that logs are not an optional extra. They're the record of reality that helps you see what is going on and prove what happened. When that record is centralized and protected, it becomes credible forensic evidence rather than a fragile set of local notes. That is why central logging is a core part of securing payment environments and why reliable retention is a security control in its own right.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.